Welcome to Leadership, especially to the Last Word podcast studio, from where I'm hosting this interview. My name is Azu Ishekwene. I'm the editor-in-chief of Leadership, and this interview is streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. My guest today is a very special person. She is, in fact, August Ellie. I'm, of course, talking about the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina, Mohammed. Amina needs very little introduction. Apart from being the world's #2 civil servant, she was special advisor to the former Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon. She was also Minister of Environment and senior special assistant to 3 former presidents on the Millennium Development Goals. And in case you missed it, there was a special event hosted to mark her 60th birthday on Friday. Welcome, Amina.
Thank you so much, Azu. It's wonderful to be with you.
And happy Diamond celebrations. And congratulations on your reappointment as well.
Thank you very much. Humbled by the reappointment, and 60 is the new 40.
That you actually took that question off my page because I was going to start by asking, is age a number for you?
Age is your lived experience. And so for me, I don't normally do birthdays, but this one was celebrated my family and friends. And really, it's in honor of those who have been part of my 6 decades, with thanks to the Almighty.
Thank you very much. And once again, congratulations. And we wish you the best and many more fruitful and prosperous years of service to humanity. Now we'll take to the questions. How do you think the Sustainable Development Goals can play a bigger role in advancing human rights and across the globe?
Well, first, I think it's good to remember it took 4 years to shape those goals, and they built on the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. It's a framework that has human rights at the very center. It took us a while to get consensus on Goal 16, which is all about the rule of law. It is about strong institutions, and that's what really underpins a thriving democracy, one where it's inclusive, where justice is attained for everyone, and hence you hear us talk about leaving no one behind. It's an agenda that really goes beyond just looking at the social. It does the environment and it does the economy. And I think that's the whole of development, whereas before we were just attending to a very small part of it. Important, but now it's the holistic way of looking at sustainable development, that you're talking about inclusive economies, one where everyone participates. And in participating, you're achieving your very basic human rights to education, to health, to ending poverty, social protection, a job. These are all things that are important to the human endeavor.
Thank you very much, Amina. Last year was, of course, a very difficult year for the world, and especially so for developing countries and for Nigeria as well. And we are aware that COVAX and the UN played a big part in helping the response against COVID-19. You set up a basket of funds that raised about $2 million to support the domestic efforts, domestic multifaceted private sector effort as a response to COVID-19. Now, how is the UN helping to track the use of those funds and to ensure that it is transparently accounted for?
Well, first, very much appreciation to the whole donor community that came behind the government and the UN to put together that facility. And that facility has very clear parameters for use in the response to the COVID pandemic, both health, but also socioeconomic. And the way it is structured, you would see that it's quite transparent and accountable and works under the RC, our resident coordinator here in Nigeria. It has shown how when you have such an emergency response, that people come together because you can go further. You can get the scale, there's more coherence and coordination. So that coordinated effort with that pooled funding really did enable us to reach as many as we could with what was available in that short time.
As I'm sure you're aware, there are concerns in developing countries about access, more access to COVID-19 and treatment and all of that. Now, COVAX has also promised to do more, and a number of countries are coming forward, supported by the UN, to ensure that poorer countries have access. Are you satisfied with the progress so far in that direction, especially in terms of access of poorer countries to vaccines?
Well, first, let me say that the WHO, together with its partners, designed the COVAX facility, which is part of the ACT Accelerator. It's a multifaceted response to getting on the vaccine, getting on the other important elements for the COVAX response, the vaccines, inclusiveness, research, pharma. So the vehicle itself is solid. What it doesn't have is fuel. And what we really needed was to have a global response to what is a global pandemic, and especially for the most vulnerable. To date, I would say that we're incredibly disappointed that we don't have a vaccine for everyone around the world, especially the frontline workers who have sacrificed their lives and continue to do so. With the proliferation of new variants, this makes it even more difficult. And we've always said that where there is COVID, and it isn't attended to, it'll be everywhere. And so it is something that we are working on together with our partners. We have had many, I would say, major meetings of the international community with leaders, and they really haven't fulfilled the promise to leave no one behind. And we continue to work towards that. Let me say that Africa is not standing still. The African Union already has a huge program that they're looking at for the next emergency pandemic, where they're focusing on production of vaccines in Africa. This, the European Union and other partners are supporting to try to see that we are better prepared for what will be another pandemic. Let's be prepared. We don't hope for it, but let's be prepared.
Like the Boy Scout. Now, right, Amina, you're passionate about women and children issues. And the Sustainable Development Goal is one of the vehicles to ensure that no child and no woman and vulnerable people are not left behind. Now, what more efforts would you like governments to make to ensure that the Sustainable Development Goal achieves the aims and objectives that were set in 2030?
Well, for all the SDGs, the importance, the anchoring of them is at the local government level.
Right.
So what I would say is that government really needs to invest in institutions. It's not very attractive. You have 4 years in power, and you certainly don't want to put your resources in something that you don't see the dividends of immediately.
Right.
These are long-term investments. But I think this is where, in many countries, we have not done as well. You need to invest in the institutions. The local level is where the responsibility of basic health care is, of education, of the supply of water, of social protection programs. Basic human rights are all at that local level. And that's where the investments need to go in. If we can get them in there, we can start to look at the infrastructure we have, fill the gaps. But most importantly, we need the human resource. And human resource today comes with technology. We can move in leaps and bounds. We can take the COVID silver lining that we see in that cloud to look at connectivity, to look at energy and the transition, because we are talking about our green transitions.
Right.
And then, of course, we can start to look at the whole food chain. So food security, put those three in context, and you will find that from the grassroots up, we will begin to empower people. Once you empower the families and the communities, there you will see the support system for children. When you see children on the street, it's not because parents want to send them to the street. There are many more complex issues about that. And what we need to do is look at those root causes. When you see young people get into insurgency and terrorism, they're not born insurgents and terrorists. It's a creation, an environment that creates them. And that environment needs to be addressed. Again, access to your basic rights, justice, a future, one where you see some hope. And I think in this country, there's an enormous amount of potential, an enormous amount of hope. If we can just communicate that, we can get it right in all its elements, and that we can understand that it is about generational journeys. And perhaps now is a good time to reflect and to see what pathways do we have for coming out of the complex situation we're in. And we're not the only one. Nigeria is just one of many countries that's been afflicted by COVID. It has had really, really damaging effects on the economies. That we have not, in many countries in Africa, collapsed is because of the leadership that we have. And I think that now's the time to put people, to put children, because they are our future. We're borrowing that future from them, at the front of it and at the center of our policymaking.
That's very true. Now, talking about the impact of COVID and of crisis generally on children, I think on Friday, The Guardian published a report, a UN report actually, that 324,000 children have been displaced by the impact of insurgency in most parts of the Southeast. What do we need to do to stem the tide? Of course, the insurgency has been on for 12 years. But the UN published a report only on Friday that 324,000 children have been impacted by the insurgency. What more do we need to do to stem the tide, you think?
Well, in stemming the tide, the government obviously has their strategy for working not just within Nigeria, but across our borders, because the insurgency is a West Africa issue. It is a North Africa issue. We have many complexities around this. So while they are trying to figure that out, to see how they can put in the preventive role, the mediation role, the somehow, as you see in Libya, the end to one conflict results in a risk of what happens with those insurgents from another. And so we do have to try to protect our borders, protect our people. But in the meantime, the humanitarian work that the UN does with its many partners, its NGOs, government itself, here we have to find a way for reintegration, to find those homes where the children have come from, and to ensure that those homes are also empowered. Many of the homes that you're talking about are those living beneath the poverty line. And so we have to, again, go back to the local level. What are the systems in place and structures in place to ensure that there are jobs, that there are safety nets, that we can put kids back in school, that get a quality education, not just go into a classroom and sit for a few hours, that they have access to healthcare. And I think school feeding, all of these are important components of what we know needs to be there. The scale of it needs partnerships. There is no one government, local government entity that can address this. A coordinated approach with the partnerships that the SDGs again call for, and Goal 17 really just says how that's to be done.
And talking about partnerships, the Center for Public Policy Research, part of the symposium that it organized on Friday, actually focused on how the SDG can be a tool for advancing some of these challenges that you've mentioned. How do you think that institutions like that can carry the work forward?
A lot of it is about, first of all, sharing the knowledge, making the tools available, explaining how you lose the framework in a domestic situation. Right. This is not a prescription from outside. This is something Nigeria participated in before the SDGs were born, as did 192 countries. So explaining it, bringing it down to the local level in a way that is not you just paste it or prescribe it. To look at the first 6 goals. They are the unfinished goals of the MDGs, but they're specifically rooted in the services that government has to provide, education, health, water, ending poverty and hunger. But then you come to the next goals, from 7 to 15. This is where the economy needs to have partnerships, investing in infrastructure, in jobs, in clean energy, in the transitions that are green and blue. So we have, marine. We have the marine side of our economy, but we also have the green side. if you look at those, they stand on strong institutions and partnerships.
Sure.
So investing in an economy gets you the revenues that you need for the first 6, but it stands on 2 solid pillars. We must invest in strong institutions and partnerships. That, I think, will give us where we need to be by 2030. It's less than a decade. It's the one framework no one disagrees with. You will not find anything that you will disagree with in that framework. And it's a good framing of a conversation, of a policy framework, of an investment plan.
Now, we're about coming to the end of this engagement, on this interview this morning. And I'd like to go back to where I started, which was your birthday. I mean, if you had 3 wishes, 3 birthday wishes, what would they be?
Well, first I would, defer to the Almighty, because I would like to continue to get guidance for the wisdom, the courage, and the health that I've had. The second would be that we have a genuine intergenerational transition from mine to the youth that are waiting to take this baton. And very soon, if we don't find ways to partner and make sure that transition happens, then I think it doesn't augur well for the aspirations and potentials of the country. So youth must come first in what we do. And by the way, youth include women. It is 50-50. The third, I would say, is that it's really important to see women in leadership at all levels of public service, of the private sector, in civil society. So all facets of life, in the same way that we hold down a family, a community, and society, we should be able to hold down the other side of leadership. And perhaps if we do that, it would be more inclusive.
Sure.
It would be more focused on what the well-being of people ought to be, rather than as self-centered as we see. So to see women in leadership in a very strong and robust partnership with able men.
And the third and final one will be what?
Is that not the 3? God, young people, and women in leadership.
Well, with that, we have come to the end of this interview. I would like to extend my special thanks to the Backstage team who've done an incredible work to bring this interview your way this morning. I would also, of course, like to thank our partners, T-Way Media UK, who are helping to stream this interview live on Facebook and on YouTube as well. And of course, I'd like to thank the chairman, our facilitator in chief. She worked with your extraordinary media team to bring this interview the way of all those who are engaged with us this morning. And finally, of course, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to share this moment with us today. Until I come your way again, here is my last word.
I have a last word.
You do?
I do, and I break protocol all the time. But really, just to say that leadership ought to be congratulated, because putting a woman in that leadership position after, of course, the passing of my friend and my brother, I think is admirable. It carries on his word, his work, and the spirit of what he put in terms of supporting women.
Thank you very much, Amina. You see, I have the last word, and that is joy comes. Until we come your way again, bye for now.